Technology. Okay, everybody, welcome to the 6 p.m. workshop. You're all heroes for making it this far. Credit to you, seriously, credit to you. I'm Stewart. You've seen me today, probably. And I'm joined with my co-presenter, Mr. Michael Free, who you've doubtless seen many times. Do say hello, Michael.
Hello, Michael. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, there might be a few jokes of that sort during the course of the workshop. We'll see how it goes. So, we're here to talk about designing reflective observation tasks. And we will, in fact, be designing such a task today. So prepare your minds, because that is the direction we're going in. Just a quick word, I suppose, about who we are. I'm now Dr. Stewart Gray. Michael insisted on including that detail, but it's okay because I would have included it if he hadn't. I'm an English teacher at Hanguk University Foreign Studies. Michael, a word about yourself?
Quick word. Hello. Yes, I'm not a doctor, but I'm perfectly okay with that. My wife isn't, though. She's trying to convince me to get the old DR in front of my name. I don't know. I work in the lovely city of Chuncheon at Kangwon National University. And yeah, I don't think you really need to know that much more about me. Stewart is much more important than I am. And yes, congratulations, Dr. Gray.
Oh, there's a joke. You've made me think of a joke now. Your
Oh,
wife,
no.
your wife is pushing you to get the DR, right? Well, it's better than your wife pushing you to get a DNR, right? Yeah.
Oh.
Does that register? Or perhaps it's a bit extreme. Anyway, we should probably do the workshop now. It's been a long day. Apologies for this higher thing, which actually waived. Sadly, Zoom presentations they don't work, so that's not happening. I'm very sorry. Anyway, so why are we here? We're going to do a little bit of reflective practice within this session, but the main goal is that everyone here will leave and do some reflective practice. Like, seriously, that's the goal. It cannot end here. We're gonna talk about tasks. You're gonna have some time to think about tasks, and then our goal is you'll take one task away, really do it, and hopefully reap some benefits from that for your own teaching. So yeah, that's basically where we're going. It's not about this workshop. It's all about what happens after. Yeah. Though we will try to make the workshop itself reasonably good as well, but we'll see how that goes. So we're talking about reflective observation tasks. So let's start with a few basic terms, get those out of the way. Michael, you're the man when it comes to terminology. So why don't you lay it out for us or break it down for us?
No, I thought you were going to do this. Well, I guess because there's only a few of us here. You all know what a task is. I'm pretty sure you all know what an observation is. But reflective practice, are you all cool with that? Are you familiar with it? Because I don't want to tell you things that you already know, because I hate it when people do that to me. John, you're
Elevator pitch.
okay. Stewart, tell them about reflective practice. Tell them what it is.
I thought you were going to do it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, reflective practice is essentially this, right? There's the thing. If we don't, people tend to get comfortable with teaching. There has been research on it. People tend to settle in around the year 3 mark into their career. And by the year 10 mark, people are pretty solid in what they do. And a lot of teachers really don't go beyond that. And what is reflective practice? In one sentence, it is trying to not stagnate as a teacher. It is doing what is necessary to not end up in that position where after year 3 or year 5, you no longer get better at what you do. And that's it's an ambitious goal because it is very easy to settle in, and we've all settled in to one degree or another. But the idea is, if we can, we're going to try to break out. And we do this by consciously observing what we do, taking a good hard look at it, and experimenting with ways of doing it differently. So that's reflective practice. Look, understand, plan, try again, and proceed in that fashion for 45 years until you retire, at which point you'll be an amazing teacher because you never stop learning. Michael, would you say that covers it?
Pretty much, yeah. Why is reflective practice good for us?
Ooh, well, that I have to answer that. Like, I had a quick answer for that, but it was based on the assumption that it is better to learn than not to learn. So if you don't like to learn, I can't really, it's hard to argue that you should do it because your argument against me will always be, I don't really want to learn anymore. But the fact is that we can always be doing better and we can always be improving ourselves as professionals. And if we do so, we will probably do better by our students. So even if we personally are quite comfortable, the other argument would be a teacher who actually looks at what they're doing and then changes it to be better will serve their students better than one who does not. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much, yeah. That's pretty good.
I
There's
guess
also
I'm
the neat little quote from Richardson Noonan that I've just put in the chat here. Experience alone is insufficient for professional growth, and that experience coupled with reflection is a much more powerful impetus for development. I really like that quote. I think it hits why reflective practice is good right on the head, in addition to what Stewart, Dr. Gray, just told us.
okay, I think we've all had enough of that. So, I mean, yes. And that, I think the quote does capture something important as well, because you might think that, as you gather experience, you're infinitely improving. Like, oh, I've had 20 years experience. But if you stopped learning after 2 or 3, then what does it mean to say that you have 20 years experience, right? More is needed after you've achieved a point where you can coast by if you want to. You may have to go beyond that. Anyway, I'm giving a speech now. You shouldn't have asked me this. If you had defined it, it would have been over in 5 seconds. But here I am giving a speech at 6 p.m. It's ridiculous. Shall we move on, perhaps?
If you want.
I think I do. I think
okay.
I do want to move on.
We're going to talk about, yeah.
So yeah, this is a quote that says basically the same thing. Admittedly, these are very kind of assertive quotes. They're supposed to kind of shake us out of our complacency. We do not learn from experience, said John Dewey. We learn from reflecting on experience. And so, having given a lot of time to this kind of assertion, we now have to slip in the Easter egg, because our Easter egg is the Shawshank Redemption. And so Michael came up with a quote related to the movie to keep it thematic: get busy reflecting or get busy dying, professionally speaking. So there you go. And if you're doing the Easter egg thing, Shawshank Redemption, I assume it's the Shawshank Redemption with a the. I hope so. Yeah, that was not in the slightest bit smooth, but Annika, I really appreciate that. So anyway,
Stewart, sorry, what number is that?
Oh,
you know,
I believe 3. Let me double check that.
Kirsten is nodding, so yeah, it would be
3. It's Easter egg 3. Oh wait, hang on. The email I got does not, listen carefully, ladies and gentlemen. The email I got does not include the word the. It simply says, quote, Easter egg 3 is Shawshank Redemption. So please do not put the in, because it probably isn't necessary. But try both if you have any trouble. So we got to move on. God.
Stewart, how much coffee have you had today?
All the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
This is my 3rd thing. I did the opening ceremony. I had another presentation. Here I am. Anyway, I probably shouldn't be the one with the PowerPoint behind me, but Michael insisted. So anyway, we've talked for literally 10 minutes about how reflective practice is great. So it's time to do some, I think. It's time to jump right in. So we're going to do some reflective practice right now, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to give you a super simple question, which I'd like you to ask somebody else and talk together with your partner to reflect upon your teaching. Now, the question, it's not actually a question, it's an instruction. Share one critical incident from your recent teaching practice. I shall read it again. Share one critical incident from your recent teaching practice. Now, if there is anyone here who has not heard the expression critical incident, allow me to elaborate. A critical incident in teaching is a moment of significance, some experience, some kind of memorable thing that happens in your teaching. It could be a good thing, like a moment of, oh my God, that was great. Or it could be a bad thing, like, oh, what is going on? Any kind of significant moment that stays in your mind. Please try to think of such a thing right now. Take a moment on it. Think of your own teaching right now. What has happened recently that was memorable for you? Michael Free provides an example. A student refused to do their presentation when called upon. Indeed, a good example. Okay, everybody, quick thumbs up. Do you have something in mind? Fabulous. And now I shall drop you in with a partner. And I will give you this as a task, a reflective task. Please listen carefully. When one person shares their critical incident, I want the other person to listen carefully and to ask questions to get more details. Questions like, why did that happen? Why is it memorable for you? Do you think you can do anything about this? That type of question. So your job is listen and ask questions. And then switch, the other person shares and the other person asks questions. Is that okay? So we are asking questions to help the other person remember more details and reflect more deeply on the critical incident. So here is somebody for you to speak with. Please join them now and talk together.
You excise that.
Welcome back, everyone. Can you hear us? Thumbs up quickly. Thank you. Perfect. Now, can I impose on one person to share a little bit for us? Is there anyone who would volunteer to do so?
Annika.
What? Oh.
Annika, how generous.
Of course. I was jumping at the chance. Let's see. So I was trying to think of a critical incident recently. I'm teaching presentation right now, and it's a bit hard because they assign us classes by major as opposed to skill level when it comes to their ability to speak English. And so one of the classes, I wanted them to share with each other what they had written down, but the students who were lower level, they just didn't understand when I wanted them to like ask a question, then answer. So what I ended up doing in the next class after I realized like they just didn't get it was to act out what I wanted to do. I was student A and I read the thing, and then I was student B and I responded. And that seemed to help them. I felt ridiculous, but it seemed to help them. And I saw people speaking in their breakout rooms. So I guess it worked. No, it worked. It worked. They did it.
Cool. Can I ask one question? What would you take away from that for another class?
For another class? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's like, what did that teach you that you can use next time, maybe even with different students?
Oh, if you have to, if no one's volunteering, do it yourself. Because I had asked people like, can you help me? Like I was asking students, can you help me to show other students? And they all told me no. They all shut me down. I was like, oh, okay. And at that moment when I was teaching class, I was like, all right, well, I guess we'll do something else. I couldn't think of like what to do in that moment. And then after that class, and then I kind of thought about it a little, that's when I was like, all right, if students are just gonna shut me down and not help me show others, I'll just try a different way.
There you go. An excellent reflection, Annika. Thank you very much. I hope everyone else had such fruitful discussions. That's a great example. Congratulations, everybody. You have done some reflective practice. In fact, if you learned nothing else today, technically, you benefited from that. So, you know, you're welcome. But so anyway, point is reflective practice. And it can be something like this, talking about a critical incident. But this is just one possible example. We do want to share this kind of larger framework for doing it. Now, this is basically the cycle of reflection. If you look at the top one, the top item, it says concrete experience. So you have an experience, like your students won't volunteer to help. And then there's observation. And the bottom one is conceptualization, which is basically what I did with Annika a moment ago, when I said, what can you take from that, which you're going to be able to use next time? So that's conceptualizing something from the experience. And then the final one on the left of this image, active experimentation. So you take that insight and you actually put it into practice and see what happens, right? And this is the cycle. And we basically did that just now. But there's one problem, one weakness, if you will, in what we just did. What we did was valid and useful, but there was a weakness. And particularly that weakness has to do with this, observation. Now, even though I'm sure your memories are quite good, it is true that the discussion we just had was based entirely on memory which is imperfect, which is susceptible to change, even revision. And so it's generally better, where possible, to actually have some kind of concrete observation, like some kind of objective data that you can then work from. So, for example, the conversation we just had would have been a lot more solid if before this workshop you had made some kind of record of the event. But because we didn't have that, we were working from memory. And the focus of this workshop, more than anything, is on the observation component of the model. We're taking a look at how to get the data that you can use to reflect on your own teaching and thereby experiment with it further and improve it. Now, as for observations, the real master, the king, the big daddy, if you will, is not me, it's Michael Freese. I'm going to turn it over to him for this next part to talk about why observations are so good.
I'm just having so much fun listening to you talk.
Don't say that to get out of doing this.
It's just fantastic. No, yeah, observation. Why are they good? Well, if you've read this book here by John Roberts, which is quite thick, but just
what's the title? What's the title?
Language Teacher Education.
Mm-hmm.
We have a slide at the end that will give you the references. He gives us a couple of reasons why observations are good. They give us direct evidence of teacher behavior, of interaction, and the classroom climate. People these days, a lot of people, they talk about the ecology of the classroom. Observations will give you direct evidence of what's going on. They also give you firsthand formative information, formative as opposed to summative, of course, information for professional and personal development. So having people observe you is good for those two reasons. Now, Richards and Noonan in this book, which is blurry.
It's blurry.
Second Language Teacher Education, edited by Richards and Noonan. They say a couple of other things. One, which is good if you feel like you're stagnating, and even if you don't feel like you're stagnating, observations can give you fresh ideas, especially if you get someone else to observe you. They're just they come at it, they might be able to see something that you don't see. They might have a specific technique that you didn't know about or you weren't using, having suggestions like that. And the really, probably for me, the most important point about observations being good is that they allow you to see your teaching differently, both with respect to what you're doing and how you're doing it. So when you have a chance to observe or be observed, you know, it's a good thing. You need to consciously put this in your mind, because a lot of people, even experienced teachers, they don't like the idea of observations. They're scary, right? Like we do it all the time. We observe our students all the time, and we tell them, I mean, at least I do, you know, just get used to it. I'm going to observe you, just get used to it. But when it comes to my turn, you know, I get shy.
Yeah, we
Now,
know, Michael. We know. And
yeah,
we're there for you.
I'm very, very shy, as you know. Now, Stewart, are you going to tell us about reflective observations now?
Quite possibly. Let's see what the next slide is, and then we'll find out. So, yeah, observations are good for the reasons that Michael just outlined. So the question is, quite simply, how do you do an observation, right? And there's so many options and so many ways, and that's basically what we're looking at. Tasks for observation purposes, gathering that data for reflective practice. And super simply, there are 4 things that it's good to decide in advance, if possible. Focus is one thing. The person who is observing, whoever it is, good to know what they're looking for. And the observer should be decided. Who is it? I'm going to talk a bit about that. The procedures. So exactly what are they going to do? And what type of data are they going to collect? And finally, the follow-up. How is feedback going to happen? What kind of further steps are going to be taken to make use of the gathered data? And we're going to talk just a little bit about each of these now before we press on. So of course, the focus, the best part about the focus is it can be anything, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, whatever you are interested in, that could be a focus. Examples given in one of Michael's wonderful books. The teacher's time management could be observed. How well did they manage the time? Their patterns of interaction. Tom Farrell, the famous RP guy, he loves to talk about studies that show teachers ask like 50 questions to one student and 0 questions to everyone else. And there are studies showing stuff like this. And sometimes teachers aren't aware that they're doing that. So interaction patterns can be an excellent focus for observation. And yeah, questions and answers, organization, but really anything you want it to be. Whatever, particularly if there's something on your mind. When we were talking about critical incidents just a moment ago, if there's anything these days that is perhaps on your mind, like, why is this happening? What is happening? What can I do about this? That would be a good focus for an observation task. The second thing is the observer. Who's going to observe? And there have been lots of approaches to observation. And again, I'm turning it over to Mr. Free to talk a little bit about.
So for what these observations have looked like, that's what you're after?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, going back to John Roberts, we've got a few different types of observations. The one that most teachers hate is the institute provided observation, where a supervisor comes in and they look at you to make sure you're doing a good job. In Korea, in my experience, these tend to be, how should I put this politely, useless for us as teachers, because what they focus on is administrative matters. They design this, they want to know, are you starting your class on time? Well, that, yes, usually, but it doesn't really, yeah, we'll give you 10 minutes of notice. Yeah, John could tell you just as well as I could, because we used to work at the same institution where some of these examples might be coming from. The institute provided supervisory observation is not always that great for us.
Ooh, supervisor.
But you also have student teacher or pre-service
Ooh,
pre-service observations. So this could be where you go in and you're watching a master teacher or an experienced teacher. The one that I always remember is when I first arrived here many years ago. I got to go to Chorwan. I was working for Epic, and they took all of the Epic teachers from Kangwon province. So there were hundreds of us, and we went up to Chorwan, and they made this poor Epic teacher, this poor young lady, had to do a demonstration lesson, a full lesson on the auditorium stage in front of 400 people watching her. It was, I found her afterwards. I sought her out and I said, I'm giving you a virtual hug right now because I know you don't know me, so I'm not going to walk up to you and hug you. But like just doing that, you deserve like a high five, and don't listen to any criticisms of what you did, because that's just that's horrible. Another type of observation is peer observation. This is my personal favorite. Get a friend, get somebody like Stewart to come into your class, get John to come into your class, get Kirsten to come into your class, or anybody that you know. You can keep this less formal, but you should still keep it focused, even if it is informal. Peer observations, especially if you get into the habit of doing them, are really good. The problem is, you know, when you're live, when you're on campus, you know, how can you figure out the scheduling? This is where, if you're doing something online or you're doing something that's recorded, you can use that to your advantage. And of course, you can also do self-observation. Now, this is a little bit tricky, because our brains, and this isn't just my strange brain, our brains, they trick us sometimes. They tell us what we want to hear. If you've ever proofread a paper, you'll know it's, how do I always end up with some misspelling that I didn't see? It's because your brain just says, no, Kentanayo, it's all okay. It's all perfect. There's no mistakes. But you see them later. But you can still do self-observations. You can do a teaching journal, teacher diary, something like that. And again, now that we're online, you can go back and look at one of your Zoom recordings and see if what you think you were doing matches what you are actually doing. And you'll be surprised. Oh my goodness, I'm talking much too fast. This is one of my problems that's just perennial. I get, when I'm teaching, I get excited about what I'm talking about, and I start to talk too fast, and I forget that the students are second or third or fourth language on. They're not, I'm not talking to them in their first language, and I'm going too fast. But those are some of the ways that observations have looked: institute provided, student teacher pre-service, peer observations, and self-observations. And yes, Kirsten, we don't get feedback about ourselves, but about student satisfaction.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's always a trade-off. I mean, all of these observations have, you know, benefits and drawbacks. Very briefly, when I was teaching at a Hagwon in Seoul, I remember I got a class of like second grade elementary kids. I was able to get them to talk to each other, right? In English to each other, which I considered a huge success. Like that was, I'll never forget doing that. And then when I had my open class, which my bosses observed, they told me to stop doing it. They said, don't do that. And I said, why not? And they said, well, the parents don't want them to talk to each other. They just want them to talk to you. And yeah, so institutional observations, often garbage, but don't worry, because that's not even what we're focused on today. So yeah, you choose the observer. It can be you yourself or somebody else. And then there is the question of exactly what you're going to do. And there are a few pretty good approaches. You have to kind of ask if you're going to meet in advance and discuss this, or if you're going to give the observer a free hand. That's one thing. And some good options for procedures. prepare a checklist. And overall, it's good if the procedures have either they're primarily objective in nature or a mix of objectivity and subjectivity. Because the more subjective they are, the greater the risk that the result is going to be something like, I saw your class and I liked it. I liked it. You did a good job. And from this, we learn exactly nothing. So it's nice to have something hard and objective where possible. A checklist is a good approach to this. If you know your focus, you can prepare. Do I do this? Yes, no. Do the students do this? Yes, no. Counting instances of things is also very good. Simply, how many times do I ask questions to students? How many times do they ask me? Would be just counting objectively what is happening in my class. Other things like, especially if you're in a Zoom session, you can find the exact time, 21 minutes and 23 seconds, said something aggressive to a student. Like you can give an example like that. And on the more subjective side, you can ask your observer, if it is someone else, to describe what they see in a narrative style. Like, I saw this happened. It seemed that you did this and this was the reaction. It can be, so there's all kinds of ways that the observer can come up with something for you to use after the fact. And these are some good examples, more or less objective, but some element of objectivity is really important, whether you be self-observing or peer observing. Either way, some objective detail to make sure we escape from the trap of saying, I liked this and I didn't like this, because that doesn't really tell us very much. So there you go. And the final thing is totally open, really. The question is, what do you do next? If you have been observed by someone else, do you have a meeting, or do they just email you the results? And what do? Do you take that and do you plan your next class using it to reshape the class? Like, you have a free choice in how you do this, but there must be a follow-up, because it's essential that the cycle proceeds. It's never enough to say, well, I learned something today, and then forget about it. There has to be something to follow that. And so with that in mind, these are the 4 things which go into a task, any kind of observation task. And God's preserve us. I'm talking a lot, aren't I? I'm very sorry. I apologize. I know it's a presentation. I'm supposed to talk, but Jesus. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael again, because we're going to ask you to think of a task that you can actually do, really do, in your own teaching after this workshop. But just to go beyond this and give you a little bit more of an example, we have a particular example that Michael Free has described to me, which I thought was very interesting. So he will now describe it for you as well. Mr. Free, if you'd be so kind.
I will describe it for you. Yeah, so this is taken from Martin Parrott's book, Tasks for Language Teachers, a classroom-based task. Number 7, in case you care about what number it is. And it's about evaluating lesson plans. So the aim here is to test out some assumptions and gain some insights, if possible, into lesson planning. And I quite like this. He goes through and he states the aim very clearly, and then he gives you some different options as to how you can do this. So he says you can do this with a colleague. So we're going to do peer observation here. What you can do is you can write out your lesson plan, and then you erase the aims. Then you have the colleague observe the lesson, and then they fill in the blanks. They tell you what they think your aim was, and you see how well those two things match up. You compare what your aims were with the aims that were observable to the observer, if that's not too confusing. So you can do that with a colleague. Very easy to do. You can also do this with your students, and when I first saw that, I kind of said, but my students, they don't know anything about teaching. And they don't, it's true, but they'll get there, maybe. But what you can do in a similar way to number one is you write the plan, probably simplifying it a little bit, and blank out the aims and give it to the students, and then you tell them, what did you learn from this? And then you match up what they're telling you with what your aims actually were. What did you learn from this? Or another question, which is good if you're teaching English ed students, which I sometimes am, or you're teaching people who are going to be teachers, you can ask them, why do you think I did this? Why do you think I did this? I actually asked my class this question. This was back in the halcyon days of pre-COVID, where I was actually in a classroom with students. And what I did was I broke my Korean students' brains a little bit by having them co-construct their midterm exam with me. And I said, you guys are going to work in small groups, and you're going to come up with questions for the exam, and I'm going to actually use some of them on the exam. And at first they didn't understand, and then they understood what I wanted them to do, but I could tell that they were not, I don't know if curious is the right word, but I guess that's an okay word. They were curious to know, like, why is he getting us to do that? And I asked them, I said, why do you think I'm doing this? And they said, because you're lazy and you don't want to make up the questions yourself.
Hey,
I said, no. I said, because you guys are going to learn something just by doing this. And also, yeah, I am a little bit lazy, but it actually helps you if you're designing the questions. It gives you some insight. And we went through, and they got to choose how much different sections were worth, and they really liked it, but they'd never done it before. So you can do this with your students. You can do a retrospective plan. This is his third option. You can observe a lesson. So I can go into Stewart's class, or Annika's class, or John's class. I observe the lesson, and then I write down what I think the plan was. And then again, you compare what the observer writes down with what the teacher actually had in mind. And then you can write a detailed lesson plan, and this is a little bit complicated. As you go, you write certain things down, so you have your lesson plan in front of you, and if you change something, you note what you've changed. And when you get to each stage in the lesson, you write down the time. And again, the goal here is to compare what you actually did with what you intended to do. And you can do this offline. You can do it online, make use of Zoom recordings. Just send a Zoom recording to someone, and they can look at it. And you could also do it with your students, I think, but that to me would depend on what particular specific class you were teaching. I wouldn't want to do it with the art majors or music majors at my university. They're not up to it.
Michael is adorably cynical, as we all know. As a British person, I appreciate cynicism. It is, if anything, the lifeblood of my culture. Was it Bill Bailey said, I'm English and therefore I crave disappointment. So anyway, yeah, Michael laid it out there. Yeah, fabulous reflective observation task. One way or another, you give your plan to another person, they watch you, and then basically they tell you if you did that or not. And then your intention is compared to your action. And so that's a good option, but of course it's one among infinite possibilities. And so that's where we're going next, is what is possible. But Michael did briefly mention the idea of sending a Zoom recording or something. And that's something we wanted to give a quick word to before getting to the workshop part, which is that, of course, although a lot of us are moving offline now, the timing is awful. But if you are online, it's much easier to do observations in several ways, right? For one thing, it's much easier to record your class, so you can just send the video to someone else and they can do the observations without having to be in your Zoom room, which is lovely. Even if someone does want to be there live, it's easier than it was. You don't have to travel or stuff like that. So yeah, it's essentially being online, if anything, makes this easier. Just gathering data and observing it is easier in that sense. But of course, it doesn't really matter whether you be offline or on. The goal is basically the same, to gather data on your teaching. And with that being said, it's time to talk about tasks in your context, ladies and gentlemen. And by ladies and gentlemen, I mean 2 ladies, 1 gentleman, and someone else who I can't see. So the question is, before we proceed, what is your context? Now, I know that John is a university teacher. I assume primarily a university teacher. As for Kirsten, I'm not so sure.
Can I say quickly?
Yeah, by all means.
I'm teaching elementary.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah.
And so we got 1 university, 1 elementary. Annika, I never asked.
I'm university too.
University as well, thank you. Which leaves Anpurna Maheshwari. May I ask what your teaching context is? School. The answer is school, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that means pre-university education. So, okay, this is important. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. Namaste. From India.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us. Because this next task will, speaking will be necessary. So what I'll do, the easiest way I can think to do it is to group the school teachers together and the university teachers together, which I believe is the same group that we had last time. So you'll be talking to your friend again. And what we're going to ask you to do is basically take what we've been talking about and design a reflective task for yourself. All you need is to identify these 4 things, and then you can you'll have a task. That's all you need. And you don't have to choose the same focus as your partner if you are interested in very different things. You can choose a different focus. One person has one focus and the other person another. But the rest of the steps, let's work on getting those to be the same so you can collaborate to produce these. So, for example, I put it to you. Would you prefer a peer observation or a self-observation? Having decided that, how would you go about collecting data? And having decided that, how would you make use of that data? How would you deliver feedback? What steps would you take after that? So we put this to you as an opportunity for you to design a task that you will ideally really do after today. Now, of course, I'm being very honest here. We can't check. If you don't do it, we're not going to find you and criticize you or anything. It's entirely a matter of whether you decide that you want to do it. But we're hoping that if you have this time to think of a good task for yourself, you might then give it a try and thereby benefit. So we're going to drop you in with someone who's teaching similar age people to yourself. And we will drop in as well to see how things are going in case you need help. How long, Michael? How long shall we give them? What do you think?
I think we should give them at least 10 minutes.
10 minutes, by God. Does that sound reasonable to everyone who can hear me?
Kirsten gave me a thumbs up, so
yeah, so that's more than enough. I mean, Kirsten's got a good head on her shoulders. So there you go. This will be with a partner. See if you can't think of a nice task for observing your teaching, self or peer, either way. These 4 things: focus, observer, procedure, and follow-up. If you can do those things, you have a task. So here's your partner, 10 minutes. Let's give it a try.
And you can download the screenshot that I just put in the chat before so that you can see what we want you to do if you're not.
Thank you, Michael. Very good. Right, Michael, would you like to handle the feedback?
No.
Oh, come on. I'm tired of my own voice over here.
Okay. Annika, what did you come up with?
Annika again.
You're muted still.
All right. So I would like to focus on how I interact with my students. Because when I'm around them, they want to stop talking. And then, well, when we're on Zoom and they're doing their presentations, I've had a couple of them say, "Teacher, don't look at me. Please don't look at me," even though I'm like, well, I'm going to eventually look at you. You have to record this and turn this in. But I just kind of oblige and turn off my camera and go check on another group. Like, I want them to not be scared of me. Let's see. John gave a great suggestion if I decide to do a peer type of observation. I was feeling bad about asking someone to watch something, but he suggested if like we kind of trade, like we help each other, then maybe that would be helpful for both of us. And then I didn't get to collecting data or feedback, but those are the things that we covered. I covered step 1 and 2 so far. Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what you want to do more or less, and you know that you want to make it a peer observation. That's an excellent start. Certainly enough to get started with, I would say. What do you think, Michael? That's enough to get started, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. John, do you have anything to add?
So it's a bit unfortunate for me that this discussion is happening now, because we just went back to campus. So I think if I thought about this a month ago, then it would have been much easier to record one of our Zoom lessons that we had been having. So in the classroom is different, is trickier using a camera, trying to record a lesson. My situation as well, I don't realistically know who I would be able to invite into the classroom. So anyways, my focus, like Annika, I'm interested in getting feedback about my interaction with students and improving my interaction with students. So I think I would be doing self-observation, and I would be including the students as well. So there are a few methods how that could be done. Like, for example, what do you think about how I was joining your breakout rooms on Zoom, and then now how I'm interacting with you in the classroom? Just like make it kind of casual, get their feedback, or yeah, try to figure out how explicit I would be, like when I'm questioning them and getting their feedback from our lessons. And the follow-up, so I have a few ideas for procedures, and the follow-up part, I think I need to think about it more.
Oh, that's good. Certainly thinking is good. I think we can all agree. I mean, probably, right?
Yeah, one of the things that John brought up is that there can be logistical problems as to how you can do this.
Okay, how about this, right? How about this? Everybody here, just do it once for me, right?
Do it for the doctor.
And then if you try it once, like you maybe you do a bit of self-observation in one class, or maybe you grab a friend and you do a bit of mutual observation once. And you know what? If you hate it, you never have to do it again. But for me, ladies and gentlemen, and don't worry about institutional apathy or Michael Free's quite legitimate pessimism, just try it once and then tell me you did, and I will send you some excellent vibes. I really will. The best. You'll feel it from across the nation. And so, I mean, that's basically the note we're ending on, is that despite the challenges and despite everything, really, we're hoping you'll go and give it a shot, even just once, right? Because this is the point. And I know we talked about this at length, right? But it has to be said again and again. The fact is, it is good to take a look at what we do sincerely. It's good to do that, and it's easy not to do it. So let's give it a shot, eh? And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Wow.
Read the quote in your Morgan Freeman voice.
No, I can't read it in a Morgan Freeman voice. That's not PC. And I'm studiously PC, as you know.
No, you're not. I find I'm so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a reflective teacher can feel.
And he quotes me for some reason.
Dr.
And
Stewart, great.
references, the books that were mentioned earlier. Thank you very much. If anyone does have any questions, we're happy to answer them, obviously. But it's okay if you don't, because I
Thank you,
find
Michael and Stewart.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you two personally do then to reflect?
Well, I am and have always been a fan of the simple journal. Like just buy a 1001 notebook in any convenience store and just basically write down like critical incidents like we had at the beginning. And that's what I do sometimes, is just if there's an incident, I just jot it down to reflect on later. And I have done other things, more elaborate things at other times. Like at one point, I had a shared Google document with 2 other teachers, and we all kind of gave feedback to each other's comments on our lessons and such. So you can do that. But honestly, if you have maybe just a notebook or a note app on your phone, and when something happens, you just write it down, you're already doing more than you strictly need to. So like anything, however simple, I think is good to do. That's my answer. How about you, Michael? Anything to add?
I'm just holding up my post-it notes.
Post-it notes.
That's how I do mine. Is just I have a post-it note, and if something comes up while I'm teaching that I think of, I'll write it down. And then sometimes right after class or at the end of the day, I'll write some things down. But I sometimes forget to do that because I'm old.
It is good to do it in real time. And yeah, I mean, I know I've already said this, but even if you're just jotting down notes, better to keep them objective. Like, don't say, I feel terrible. Say instead, students did this. And like, focus on the objective details, because the fact is that when we wallow in the emotional aspect of it, in fact, even when it's a positive thing, when we feel happy, like, wow, that went so well. That went so well. Oh my God, that was such a great lesson. We miss a lot. In fact, one of the great tragedies of teaching is that the lessons where we come out smiling and so happy, they maybe didn't go as well as we think that they did. Right? Even the positive emotional responses in themselves can tell us quite little. So whether we're happy or unhappy, either way, it is the objective details that will save us. Right? What did the students actually do? What did I actually do? I may think I did one thing and did something else. So objective details all the way. Okay. I know I'm repeating myself. Okay, so I guess that's it. Thank you for your commentary in the chatting box there.
Thank you all for coming.
Right, y'all. It's been a pleasure.
Go
Have a
away.
nice rest of the conference.
Watch a Korean film.
Or watch The Shawshank Redemption. That would also be good. It's quite a good movie. Right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.